Right, let's get started. I want to begin our episode number 5 of Artfield Answers. I'm your host, Jimmy LaFleur, and I'm welcoming to this episode our guest artist, Rudy Herrera, who is extremely talented artist, muralist, community artist in terms of the amount of work he does, not only with working on mural crews and mentoring other artists, but also engaging the community and the neighborhoods that he's working with to bring out their stories, bring out their histories, and to create consensus. And it's fabulous work. I've always felt like artwork, especially in the public realm, there's a lot that is amazing about the finished product, but at the same time, there's a whole lot more that's amazing about the process, about just getting to know artists, getting to work with the community, getting the ideas and the concepts together, all that development. It's like, as I've said, that's, you learn how the sausage gets made. And
Yeah.
I think for those that are vegans out there listening and watching, I apologize for that.
They need to know as well, I guess.
Yeah. There's other things you could have, a non-meat based sausage, I guess, if you need
Right,
to.
right.
So from the very beginning, I started working on this idea that my kind of passion project is to set up this art field agency project that would begin to unite artists and begin to put together a framework and maybe a pathway to improve the art scene and maybe improve the lives of artists, and to turn up the volume a little bit on the voices of artists. And I got to know Rudy. I knew Rudy by his works, but I didn't really know him until I think it was maybe 2019, in which I started working, I kind of got an assignment associated with the 2017 on program, in which we had some funds dedicated from the public art program at the city before I retired that could be stitched together and create a gateway and an entrance to the west side. And one of the first projects that we had identified was a potential mural. Just think, where was that located? It was probably kind of across from UTSA's downtown campus near Buena
What's the name?
Vista.
The Paul Elizondo building.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
that
New
that
one.
project became an opportunity to partner. I think the partnership was with Sananto Cultural Arts. At that time, Victor was our point person, and he identified you as a lead artist to put a crew together and start the process. And that was I've worked with a lot of the different art organizations, but I hadn't really been on the front lines like that to see the beginning of a project and how it matured. And we had a really tight timeline. There were wanting to see some things happen. It was right in the middle of like the holidays too. It was kind of crazy. Talk about that a little bit, just in terms of your experience on that, because working with Victor, working with Ed, helped me remember all the other artists.
Right. It was Crystal Tamez. Who else was working at the time?
I want to,
And I
was it
can't.
April? Is that the
Yeah, I
right name?
think April. I
April?
think yeah, April. I forget her last name. I know her well, but I think yeah, but it was April. She's real good friends with Crystal. That's how she was kind of involved. And maybe Jason Eric Gonzalez.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, that's how we came to or introduced to each other, through that. As I had already kind of started my own careers with my own understanding of what it was to be an artist before Sananto Cultural Arts. But Sananto Cultural Arts, being, working with Victor and him introducing me to other artists and just kind of just showing me what kind of possibilities and opportunities are out there. I look at it as one of the milestones, of my career was, I was pretty much a DIY guy and just, whatever was going to get done was just whatever I was capable of alone. And, like for instance, working on an image with a team, I had never done anything like that. All my images had been produced by me, solely me. So, I mean, yeah, he just kind of showed me, and that organization just showed me, yeah, I guess just opened up my perspective a little bit more of what's out there and what's happening. And he brought me onto that project. I don't know if you remember, but that project ultimately, at the end of it, ended up dying. And but yeah, that was like a whole nother process. That project, even though nothing came to fruition from it, like I still the way things went down, I still got a great education from it. So
Well, I think in some ways, I hope you did, and the fact that it didn't come together was an important educational opportunity too, because
yeah, absolutely.
that, from a long time back, I won't go too much into this because this is more about you, this episode, but, the city, there's been those within the city executive level that want to see more and more murals. And certainly the murals started to happen after I left, and they started to shift those over to Centro, or what is that
Central,
word?
yeah.
Yeah,
For downtown, yeah, with Andy
yeah,
Rodriguez.
right. So I had for a long time said, yeah, doing murals would be great, but one of the key things that I had to consider always when I was working with PASA, Public Arts San Antonio, is that we had worked really hard to get that percent for art policy, which would allow us to take money from capital projects that the city was doing. We were never funded by Hotel Motel, that team, and it meant that our all of our funds had to kind of be audited in a different way. That we had to put in our hours, we had to put in where everything could be tracked so that at the end of the day, the lawyers and anyone else who might challenge, the use of the funds would see that everything was legit. It was all going into projects that were going to be permanent. They were going to be on public property. They were going to last a certain amount of time because that's the way these capital projects are funded. They're debt based. And so they have to at least last like about 20 or 30 years, depending upon the
Oh,
legal standpoint. And so I was always saying, well, why can't we? We can do murals when we have an opportunity to do it on like a public building, or we can find a way to do it. But really, what they ought to be doing is to start a mural program, or better yet, maybe find money and begin to work with existing organizations that need that money, and like Sananto or like Guadalupe Cultural Arts or any of the organizations that really had a handle, and put them in downtown, give them opportunities
yeah,
to get a light shine on them. And that they never really seemed to come to pass. And so when this project did come together and we were able to see about doing a mural, of course we had to get the buy-in from those that own the building, but the which we did
yeah,
to a great extent. But the difficulty with public projects like that is that they can be not really being decided on by people with an art knowledge of art. You've got
yeah,
people, they will take these ideas, and you bust your balls trying to get everything as they would like them to be. But then, like that project that you were working on and all the artwork, that was never seen by the public art committee.
yeah,
There was no commentary from those that had some sort of expertise in understanding the process and how it was decided. It was basically killed by people that were politicians and the people that were trying to keep the politicians happy. And so the big thing that they were just frowning on, they were like, this doesn't gel with me. Well, you're not the decision. You shouldn't be in a position to decide to approve or kill an art project. That's not the way the system was ever
yeah.
designed to work. So
I agree with that.
that
I agree with that.
that I mean, if there was something that I felt was below standard, I would have told you. You were you
Yeah,
were knocking it out of the park, but
I
you were put in a position to either live or die by, two or three people that really they also had never been exposed to doing something the right way. They were just doing it like they
yeah,
were ordering off a menu. And
yeah,
what are you hungry for? And
yeah,
that's wrong. It's like it's so wrong on so many levels. It's also just insulting. It's like being served dinner in someone's home and spitting the food out. I
yeah,
was
exactly.
it repulsed me.
And that was
But
where the education came from, man, was having, learning all that. That was like my first kind of big loss in that realm. Not only was it like, one of my first introductions into that arena, but it was like the first like kind of yeah, kind of loss or, just whatever, just when a project kind of fell through, I've always had at least a project come through to some degree, sometimes you bang it out and you bump into walls, but there's something at the end of it. That was the first time where it really wasn't. So that's where the education came from, man. I was just learning how to handle that and just, how do you that was the first time I took in that punch, so I had to learn how to
And
roll with it.
I was pretty direct with you and Victor. I believe
Mhm.
that they were putting a squeeze on me. Like I was getting close to retirement age,
Yeah.
and there was, and hopefully it's not the same way anymore. But there was kind of a real um, downturn in the way things were being handled above me. Um, it it made taking retirement a very easy pill to swallow because it wasn't good for my health, but I'm bringing that to you because I was trying to
Yeah.
explain that some of this is about, the way things go, but some of this seemed like it was about me, like they weren't necessarily wanting to give another win to me right now if they might be able to hasten my leaving. It was a milestone, but all of that, what was kind of saving grace was I really enjoyed working with you all. I enjoyed meeting you, and it actually
Yeah.
created an opportunity to have a real and I your success after that with the other projects downtown and throughout, you know, that that was also, I felt like a win for me in a way long term is this would have been a great project. This was a great team and I was glad to have experienced that.
Absolutely.
So
I think that's one of
let's
those things. It's kind of like, yeah, you know, that's another part of it. It's like it taught me how to take like the nutrition out of a bad situation. I mean, look at us, Jimmy. Like we're still here talking. We still have this relationship. We're still doing our art. You know what I mean? Think about those admins that were in place when we were involved with those projects. I mean, it makes me feel good to say like, we're still doing art. We kind of outlived them in that thing, and that was just that little thing. I got the best from it. I'm still good friends with a lot of those people involved. We're here doing this podcast. You're creating work. I'm creating work.
yeah, artists can get the job done
Yeah.
and they understand the importance of community and keeping that circle tight. And we've gotten together for coffee and tacos maybe a couple of times just to keep up with each other. So let's do our questionnaire
Okay.
section of the show. I'm going to ask several questions here. And the first one I start up with is just understanding what's your San Antonio origin story? Everyone who is in the art scene here in the community at some point, maybe their parents, grandparents, or just themselves, found themselves coming to San Antonio and making this home for at least a while. Give us a little sense of your background and how you ended coming into San Antonio.
Yeah, I my arrival to San Antonio was pretty abrupt, I was living my mom and my sister were already living here. And I was living with my grandma on my stepdad's side. I mean, I call him my dad. He's the man I love as my dad. But I was living with his mom, and as far as I knew, that was going to be the rest of my life in El Paso, Texas, right? And I was 10 years old, and then one day we lived right across the park, Pasadena Park. I get home from the park, and it's like already 8 or 9 o'clock. It's already dark, and it's like, hey, come on, you got to go live with your mom and sister in San Antonio. What? So it happened like that, and I believe it was my tia Pat dropped me off at the airport, and then, yeah, before I went to sleep, I was, like, in San Antonio. I flew on the plane by myself, like, landed here, my sister picked me up, and then, yeah, so began my life in San Antonio, and, that's how I got here, man. I've been here ever since. I'm 40 years old. I've been here, 30 years. It's my home. This is where I made my career, had my son, had my first heartbreaks, all that stuff like that, all the major hallmarks in your life. I've had them here in San Antonio, and things go well. Die peacefully in my sleep here someday.
I was reading that you're a descendant of the
Yes, sir.
Tiwa
Tiwa Nation, Isleta del Sur
nation.
tribe. Yep.
Tell me a little bit about how those connections between um, that that aspect of your cultural background versus the embracing and becoming kind of acknowledging yourself as here in San Antonio, which is, I'm sure, very different than what you were experiencing even as a young child, but probably expecting to grow into
Right.
part of that community to some extent in El Paso.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I grew up in that when I was very young, and I was kind of insulated in that. And, growing up in El Paso, you're right there in the frontera, it's a border city. And, everybody there is brown, and so, you have that cultural aspect. My biological dad is from northern Chihuahua, right? So a lot of his end of the family is, they come with those traditions. My mom is the one who's actually brings the native, into our bloodline. And, I mean, it feels funny to say that because I feel like if you're brown, you're native, you know what I mean? But I mean, that's how they start their story. My mom starts her story over there, right? So I mean, we always grew up with that sensibility. We're always kind of close around it. We knew some dances. We went to the schools, you know what I mean? We were on the little designated, couple blocks that they call the res, So I think just being around those people, there's just, when people grow up in that, like older in that, and they're teaching young people, there's just a totally different sensibility. And then, like, I not only saw it change from, that little part of El Paso to, when we were outside of that little part to El Paso, and like even more so here in San Antonio, it's just kind of I think the it always kinda made me feel satellite to, like, a lot of stuff, you know what I mean? And which was kind of a double-edged sword because, I did have that feeling, but at a lot of time, I knew how to, be comfortable in that, you know what I mean? To find whatever was good on that, so it kind of in me I think it was one of those traits that helped me be an artist in the sense that, like, it wasn't so much like, "Hey, if it's different or this and that," like, "Hey, we're already used to different." Like, we've already kinda been outside of the circle the whole time, you know what I mean? We're kinda done trying to fit in, so it's like, you're just over here. So, I mean, I I think that's been helpful in that aspect, just I think growing up in that kinda native culture and then integrating, or at least maybe not that's not the right word, but just being so close to people who don't identify as that, or like, I look the way I look. I tell people I'm Tiwa, and they're like, "No, you're a Mexican dude. You're another chubby dude in San Antonio." You know what I mean? So it's like, ah, okay, and you just learn how to live with that, and just it's kind of like my thing that I carry around. I tell my son about it, and it's a point of pride. Even though a lot of the reason why we ended up here, like the family in San Antonio is because there's a lot of, I don't want to throw people under the bus there, but there was like some tribal drama going on. You know what I mean? Google that, you can find out about it. Yeah, ultimately it brought us here. That sort of upbringing or just being close to that, you definitely grow up with a sense of other. You feel there's a little distance, right, between a lot of things. But I mean, at the same times, like that distance kind of it allowed me to incubate in my own juices, man, and be whatever I am. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I found it interesting. And one of the reasons I was pressing to ask the question is my family is quite a mixture, pretty diluted now. I'm descendant from the Choctaw Nation. And
Okay, okay.
we look French, and because the French soldier came
Ah,
when France was occupying the Mississippi area and the Louisiana area and the Alabama area. At the same time, you had Spain down in Mexico, and you had England up in the States, I mean, in the Northeast. And so at the time, the leadership of the Choctaw Nation understood that these guys are not going anywhere. All
right.
these Europeans
Yeah.
aren't going anywhere. So they began to intermarry their daughters from the chief daughters with certain Europeans back in, this is probably like the late 1600s or 1700s. Uh, and so, yeah, my found photographs, but yeah, uh, my direct descendant, which was Benjamin LaFleur, he looks very Indian, and so does
Really?
several of his children. And they played a huge, like, a great great grandfather, Campbell LaFleur, who also is my brother's name now. He was an attorney who represented the nation to the Supreme Court to try to
What?
force the government to actually pay the Choctaw Nation what they promised them when they took their lands. And he got money for them.
Really?
So I'm very proud of that background. But the thing
That's
is that
cool. That's
as
cool.
it became different over the time, like so many, like how the same way that like the certain generation of Mexican American, they didn't want their children to speak Spanish in their homes. The same thing with like my lineage was, even though my grandfather grew up and we all lived on they all lived on Choctaw territory in Oklahoma, but he moved down into Texas and he had an opportunity to work with a bank, Morris Plan Bank, and eventually he made his way from Fort Worth to San Antonio. But he was trying to integrate and be represent himself as more white than anything that had to do with Indian, so he never talked about it, and
Yeah,
in my lifetime, I've done a lot of research about it because I was really interested, and I was like, so much value and richness to that to just stop it there, and I have the ability to get on the Dawes because my grandfather was on the Dawes rolls. I can become a member of the recognized member of the Choctaw
that's pretty
Nation
cool.
if I want to, but so I'm in the middle of that, but it's like something that I do hold dear and I'd see it. Look, I guess I try to say that when I see that in other people, like this mixing of cultures and backgrounds between indigenous, but also recognizing here in San Antonio as they talk about like the confluence of peoples. There's so many people with different backgrounds and
Yeah,
it's important to talk about is all I because we're doing this podcast and I raise some of these questions trying to create and document the fact that it's important to reflect on where we've been as a individual but also as families because
yeah.
it's important not to lose that moving forward and even if it's not in your own family it's important to tell people about it so that you might reach somebody who needs to hear that.
I think so as well. I think that's very true. You know what I think happens is that I've seen it a lot, and then again, this is my very like armchair psychoanalysis thing, but it's just kind of like you get rid of your sense of history, right? You kind of so then you just think like you're here right now. You're just kind of whatever it is right now, right? And so it's kind of like there's no weight behind you, right? You're a flash in the pan. And I know I'm speaking like in an allegory and stuff, but it's like you're just right here, you're of this moment. But what that does is it's kind of like it takes when you wash all your history, you know what I mean? It's almost like you're cutting an anchor, right? Because I mean, you're continued, you talk about your grandfather, right? Like you carry a bit of his drum, that's not abstract. You know what I mean? Like you really come from these people and you exist now. And once they can kind of get rid of your history, they can kind of tell you what it is and they could implement other things, right? So now you feel like a guest, or maybe you're not welcome here, or just watch your tone, watch how you step, and this and that. But, it kind of takes away your sense of like your weight of yourself, where it's like, hey, I'm a collection of all these ancestors moving in this direction at the same time. You know what I mean? Like I'm heavy. There's a purpose. And I think with like, by stripping people's history, you can chip away at that. I think that's what's dangerous. I think that's why it's important for a lot of people to know as far as they can go back, even if they choose to move with that forward, is like just know, you know what I mean? Like that you're not just this moment right now. Like you're a collection. You're a crescendo of this symphony of all the people before you. So I think it's important. I agree with you. It's important that we know as far back as we can.
Yeah, for ourselves and for our neighbors too. Like again,
Absolutely.
somebody who may need to just have that sense of discovery, self-discovery as well.
I agree.
About art, okay? Going into art,
All
tell
right, we're
me
going about art. That's right.
me about your art's origin, right? How did you was there a moment in time or an age or something in which you felt like, okay, something's happening, the momentum is carrying me into art and I feel like that's going to be like a light switch that I'm going to turn on and leave on.
You sent the questionnaire, and I remember I was looking at that question, and I hadn't really been asked that, and I hadn't really thought about it in a long time. And I think because I always did draw, even as a kid, I was always drawing, but it was never looked at. I don't know. It just seemed like I never thought of it more of just something to do than pass the time, and the people around me just never really thought much of it either. Not in the sense that it was like looked down upon, but it was just like, hey, he's drawing. It's like, I leave him alone. He's doing whatever. And then the first time I really thought about it was there was kind of like two moments, right? There was one when I was a little kid, I was maybe 7 or 8, and these people were painting a memorial piece of somebody who had passed away, and they were using like bucket paint. And my little juvenile mind, my understanding was bucket paint was used for painting things solid colors and stuff like that. So seeing it used in that way kind of even was like almost a whistle or almost a snap, like look over here. And then I think when I really saw it was when I was in 7th grade? How old are you in 7th grade? 12, 13, 12. I went to an alternative school on Bandera, and it was, and was it Highview? Anyway, but it was a classroom of like 8 people, and it was like one of those schools. We got frisked, we got searched, you got as soon as you went in, and it was just very strict, is what I'm trying to get at. And I had a buddy there, JP, and it was all mixed, middle school through high schoolers. And JP, he was like, "Hey, I always see you drawing. I'm gonna get a tattoo. Draw me a marijuana leaf." And so, I drew a marijuana. I remember I thought he was cool, right? Like he was cool. He had just gone out of juvenile. He already had tattoos. He was 16. He had been shot. All this, just he was the coolest guy in our little alternative. But anyway, so I drew him this marijuana leaf, and it was cool, right? It was uh and the teacher saw it, the behavioral instructor saw it, and he was like, I got in trouble. I was one of the few students that was allowed to leave. So my mom comes and picks me up. He tells her, "Hey, your son's drawing marijuana leaves. He's not gonna be allowed to draw in here ever again." And man, that was like my mom. We hadn't been, me and my mom, we hadn't been, I was a teenager. We were just starting our life in San Antonio. Things were a little rocky, right? So, but at that moment, man, my mom, she showed up for me, in a very she showed up with me hard. She was like cussing at that dude. Hey, you're not gonna tell my son not to do this, not to blah 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 blah. And yeah, she took me out of that school. I didn't go. I ended up not going to school for a couple years after that. And but I remember going home and thinking like, wow, I didn't think it was that serious. You know what I mean? Like I figured I'd get in trouble and then I'd have to sneak my drawing in class and that was it. But I was like, that was the hardest I've ever seen my mom show up for me. So I was like, what is this? Like, what is going on? Like, what is, that was the thing that made me, okay, this is something. And like, she was mad at me, but I talked to her about a couple of days after that. And she was like, hey, I don't really know about that stuff. I don't know why you did that. That was dumb. You knew you can't be doing that. But she was like, I know you like to, and it wasn't like I wasn't like a any kind of savant at drawing or anything. I wasn't incredibly good, but I mean that marijuana that was the magnum opus of my youth, Jimmy. That marijuana. But she was the one who was like, "Hey, like this is whatever it is, it's something. It's good or bad, or it's something. Like I'm not gonna keep you from it." And so that was the first time I was like, "Okay." And then I went out and yeah, I kind of because it was just something I did to pass the time. But after that, that's when I started like, "Oh, let me look at art books. Let me what artists do I like? What are their names? So where I kind of started, fumbling some sort of study and theology around it.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a moment in which you saw the power of art.
Yeah.
It's a visual. It was a plant. A marijuana leaf. I guess it's a loaded image, right? But at the end of the day, it's not. There's more to getting high than looking at a picture, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they got upset about the picture, about the image,
Yeah.
and it says something about how images hold power. They affect people's. They create a reaction, and I
Yeah.
think what you saw is how reactive that image was that you were responsible for creating. Probably, I think when we're young, our brains and our chemistry are set in such overdrive that you might have like learned a lesson that started to come out as you
Yeah.
matured and you saw like, let's turn this into a positive. Let's put it to work for me. And it did, it really did. That's, it's another one of those educations where a loss becomes a gain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did
Absolutely.
you have any I asked this the next question because it varies from people to people, but do you have any family or, biological or other that has like an artistic skill trait? This kind of idea of artistic heredity sometimes exists. Not everybody does, but I like to just throw some of these questions out because you never
Yeah.
know what the answer might be.
I think I think on my mom's side, I had a Theo. I didn't know him well. He passed away pretty young, but he had done some time in prison and I saw all the work that he did in there and he was a talented dude, man. He was doing very cool stuff and I think that was the first time I had seen that outside myself as far as, because nobody even really drew or, I grew up around, very creative people, but I just never saw them kind of like produce something physical, an image or, a melody or stuff like that. I mean, they were creative in their lives, you know what I mean, to access the things they needed to access or wanted to. But I would say my tío, he was kind of like the closest one I saw out of my immediate family. My brother, my older brother, we have same dad, same mom, but he was a creative dude. He used to play music. He still does music now, and I saw him do some stuff like early. Again, the gang culture was real big in the early '90s when I grew up, and I saw his, he had his stack of paños and stuff like that. Like, that I think my generation, I was on the cusp end of rolling over that, so I didn't really have to, do too much. I didn't have to do any of that, you know what I mean? But I would say my brother has some his creativity kind of funneled out to creating something. His was music, some art, and my Theo, he, yeah, definitely, and you know, he reverted to that in one of the worst times of his life. So I would say those two. I'd say if anything comes something we share in that whatever something that is.
Yeah. That's that's good. It's good, I think, when you can some people don't have that at all, and they feel like they're really different from the rest of their family. The family may not understand where this artistic interest is coming from. They may be even trying to urge them to go into something more serious and more,
Yeah.
and at the other time, when you know that there's a love for art, whether it's music or poetry or all of that, it's more welcoming. It's a little bit more stable in a way. Tell me also about mentors and influences. Has there been in particular, like you have whatever skill you have, you were saying you weren't great at the beginning, but you kind of got better and better. But was there training or a mentor or anything that really helped be the key to unlock your art appreciation or your talent?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. When I was younger, I'd say maybe late teens, around
Hmm.
there, I had gotten into graffiti. And again, I wasn't particularly good at it. It was more vandalism more times than graffiti. But one of the people I met and that I'm still very close friends with is Scotch. And Scotch is a local artist here in San Antonio.
Yeah,
And even him, you know what I mean? He's gone on to have murals downtown and has his own, success. But
even
yeah,
in other cities. Yeah.
yeah, he's done stuff with, like, Coca-Cola, you know what I mean? Like, he's without abstraction, he's doing the thing, you know? But, yeah, he was someone he's a little older than me, maybe a generation more older than me, but he was, I had reached out to him because at that time he was doing some, like, what, stencil work? And I hadn't really seen a lot of that in San Antonio. Everybody was doing graffiti, writing their letters, their bubble letters, their tags and whatnot. That was kinda saturated at the time, and I was another little bit of that. And so when I saw him doing that, it was cool to me. It was just foreign to me. I was like, "Yo, how do you even do that?" And, yeah, at that time, I reached out to him through MySpace. And we ended up hanging out, and yeah, we would go and do things together and do some projects, and we would go out and put our stuff up. I was even, funny story, I was even arrested with him. We've been arrested at the same time for vandalism. But yeah, not only much so in that, but he was kind of like the first one to, man, extend community. You know what I mean? There was times where it was like, hey, can I stay on your couch? Can I get a ride here, somebody to let me rent a back house, and he was really the first one to kind of like, man, I'd say, yeah, invest in me, not just financially, but just like with his time, and he kind of showed me like a etiquette. He kind of, because at that time he was going up to business owners and pitching and selling and quoting and stuff like that. And I just hadn't done that, I would do whatever was fall on my lap, you know what I mean? Trade, yeah, I'll paint your wall, give me a meal or, whatever. So I would say him. And then, he kind of through all that, I gained some confidence in myself where it's like, yeah, I do have an artistic expression. I thought at that time, I learned how to read a little, kind of late when I was 10 or 11, but ever since then, I always had a love for reading. Shortly after that, I went to U of H and actually thought I was going to become an author, so I studied English, rhetoric, and one of the great teachers there that I met was James Zabrowski. He wrote Thinking Through Theory, and me and him, we used to ride the bus together to 42 through the Fifth Ward, and he just introduced me to a lot of great artists, authors, and one of my favorite, I take a lot of influence against with from that, what would you call it? Like magical realism, Gabriel Vasquez, 100 Years of Solitude, all that stuff, like those kind of authors. And my favorite author was Rodolfo Anaya, who wrote Bless Me Ultima. So I would kind of man, I've read that book so many times, and I would take that vibe, and I was like, what does that look like flat on an image? You know what I mean? He wrote a lot about southern New Mexico, kind of like, and that's, sometimes, at least I can kind of group West Texas in with that, you know what I mean? Because it's similar.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, I kinda felt like, man, he's talking from where I was talking to him, you know what I mean? Like, there's not an echo there, like, I feel very close, I feel like I hear his voice very closely, and so I was just kinda like, "What does that look like here visually?" So I kinda took the mood or the feeling or the ambiance, and I was like, "Man, what does that look like over here?" So, yeah, to answer that question, like, as far as people who whether they know they mentored me or not, I would say Scotch and, yeah, James Zabrowski.
Was there any kind of training, learning that you feel like you missed out on? Do you feel like that you said you almost thought you were gonna be an author.
Yeah.
Is it lack of, do you feel like you didn't have enough time to continue that practice?
I
It's kind of
think,
a
yeah,
hard question to ask.
well, I think it just kinda like, I don't know, you know what it kinda feels like? It just kinda feels like I was so involved with that, like, that was my life for a little bit, and it kinda feels like this other, like, this old flame came back into my life, and she was just so more beautiful than I remembered, and I heart, nostalgia kinda already pulled me towards her already, like, "Oh, I remember when I used to do this," and then, I delved back in, and it was just more intense than it was, and, like, my author dream was still kind of over there, you know what I mean? He's saying, "I just I just want you to be happy," and I was like, "Oh, okay, thank you." And then I kinda just jumped in with the visual art. I mean, I don't know, it's just I still feel like it's there, I still read, I still that's one of my secret things, like, art a lot of times when we take it on full on, like, or at least for me, just I do a lot of restaurant stuff, so there is work that is art, you know what I mean? And then there's my passion projects, and then kinda like writing's my secret little what would you equate that to? My little cheat meal, you know what I mean? My little thing I do in the corner where no one's looking, you know?
The last episode, I just posted it this week with Naomi Shihab Nye. She's a very famous poet, has lived here in San Antonio. She's half Palestinian and half American. And she has written many books of poetry, novels. I met her when I was 11, when I was in elementary school, and she came and did a poetry uh, series of poetry workshops with third and fourth grade classes. And so we were talking in her podcast episode. She was telling how important it is to be able to work with children at that age and help encourage them to write and to feel comfortable and to help grow their sense of confidence. Because without that confidence in one's own writing, it can be harder as they mature to feel like they can write, and
Mm.
whether it's artistically or even just in any, they it's, they see that vulnerability that, is this good enough or is this strong enough and what have you. And I think that made a lot of sense to me, because kind of for what you just said, it's a hard thing to sometimes convince yourself that you can be a writer, or so don't give up on that, because
Yeah.
I'm older than you, not by a ton, but I did take step away for most of my life from making artwork when I was working as more of an art administrator. And I did it for lots of good reasons, but now it's back. Now it's something that it's available to me again. And I've kind of after all these years tried to say, okay, well, does my love of art still, is it still strong enough for me to become an artist again? And you learn those things. And so don't give up on that. And the other thing I wanted to mention was, like, talking about Scotch. Scotch impressed me. He did a mentorship program when I was working with the city. We did a couple of workshops with groups of artists, and we gave
Right.
them pretty strong mentorship, like full days on the weekends, taking them through all this kind of training, plus meeting with other more experienced artists. And Scotch impressed me, several things. One that I'm wanting to point out is that he was a father. He made the point that he loved, and this was obviously probably after his days of getting arrested, but with
Who
you,
knows?
but
Who knows
who
what that
know?
guy
But I
did?
don't know it. I mean, he's got his own private life. But I see that because I became a father at 24, and it really, and right after I got out of school with a BFA, and I thought I was going to go off and move somewhere else and become an artist, and I was ready to go. But then fatherhood makes a big difference when you start to think about,
Absolutely.
okay, how am I going to pay for things? And my parents were pretty well off. But they also were like, you got to learn how to take care of yourself, boy.
Yeah,
They helped
yeah,
me, but I had to learn how to stand on my own feet much earlier than I thought I would. And so I see you're a father as well, and you have a close relationship with your son, and he's being mentored as a in a way that's very different than your experience as far as also seeing you mature as an artist and become involved in the community. So it's an important thing. Not a lot of the artists that you might meet in the city of San Antonio or anywhere else embrace the idea of being a father, strong father, and also an artist, and making some of the sacrifices that you have to do to be both. So
yeah.
I put that out there. It's an important thing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, tell me, I have all these questions lined up in different ways, but I do want to get to the point where, we talk about how art creates a life of art, creates experiences where you can have something come up that's controversial, subject to like severe criticism. Did you have any experiences other than the marijuana leaf? You probably did. And the West Side and the mural on the.
Well, I mean, I guess the obvious ones was, I when I was younger, I caught graffiti charges. Generally, people don't like vandalism.
Now, is this graffiti that's relative to tagging, or were you thinking this is more graffiti that was done for the purpose of expressing making an artistic expression, or maybe both?
I kind of, yeah. I was thinking about that. If I was asking that young man, like, the part where it is vandalism and crime and dangerous, that interest sparks the other half. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm just solely wanting an expression of art form or something like that, you could paint it on the canvas. I think they're kind of married, but yeah, I think they're both like spray paint things and like to kind of throw it, big old bubble letter type things. Those kind of, yeah. After my second graffiti charge, I was like, okay. They kind of throw the book at you whenever you get a graffiti charge. They don't let you. They stack community service hours. I mean, they make an example out of you, right? So even more so now, the laws have changed where it's like, if you paint, there's a certain amount of square footage that if you paint, it's a felony. And that square footage amounts to, I believe, 3 feet by 5 feet. So, I mean, like, just imagine get a 4 foot level and just, make a square out of that. If you paint more than that and they catch you, like, you're getting a felony. So it's just like, to me, I was just, I don't want to catch my felony on graffiti. So I gave that up. But, I mean, those were the two obvious ones. I think the only kind of thing I've even heard like even the slightest backlash on, was, I did a lot of the artwork for the Cesar Chavez marches. And we know what happened with that dude. So it's like, oh, man, like, yeah, it kind of, I kind of it caught
You
everybody
didn't,
involved, at least with the San Antonio thing, by surprise. And so,
right?
even more so, the backlash comes from me where I'm like, "Geez, I can't like, why did I spend so much time on that?" You know what I mean? Like, I really put a lot of effort into that. It's just kind of washed now. So, and it has to be. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think those are kind of the only ones I could kind of think of off the top of my head right now.
Pretty interesting when you think about it, though. Like all of these portraits of captains and barons and uh, individuals throughout history and in museums it makes you take pause for a second when you see the developments over the past several weeks with Cesar Chavez and how that can affect like you as an artist who's poured your efforts into creating a portrait, creating a mural, trying to say something about the right things. And then because of the times that we live in too, which are positive, the fact that women are able to speak to their own experiences and not let these things remain buried and to hold people to account. That's important for our society to move in that direction. And it has been and it will continue to be. But that's a real different change when you think about even the entire art history and all these portraits of individuals. If you were to examine their lives, I think that they would certainly fall into classes
Yeah.
of people that would just not be at the standard that we are becoming aware of today. So it's interesting. I think I, I wasn't even thinking about that. I knew that you had been involved in in a lot of that in terms of the marches, and you volunteer and you
Right.
donate your time and do a lot of the stuff to help out for these kinds of things. And that's what um, artists have been doing all over the country for years and years to try to bring their talents to help champion causes.
Right.
But tell me about also on this topic, just before we move on, what do you think about today's contemporary art in terms of, do you see it, the role of censorship um, is um, increasing? Do you feel like the way society is impacting all of us as far as what's acceptable and what's not acceptable and what might lead to censorship? Again, when I was talking to Naomi, she was talking to me all these books that are getting pulled and all these, you were talking about
Yeah.
books, and like the
Yeah.
things that are because of there's two countries kind of living together. And so some
Yeah.
part of the country wants all this stuff out and the other part of the country wants to write more. I don't know. Do you feel like censorship plays a big part in
Yeah. I think
contemporary
I
art?
I think so. No, I think there's definitely like I think like it that trickles down from like, the greater things at play. Like you said, there does seem to be like, this duality happening around us in our society. Seems like there's a narrative trying to be put, there's some rhetoric out there trying to get you to believe a certain way. And I think I was thinking about that, like how that applies to me, because I was thinking about how does that apply to me in my field, and I like to do murals. I prefer, if I get the chance, that's what I'm gonna do every time, right? And I was thinking about that because, uh, one of the things, and I think it is like a type, to me, censorship is a tool to kind of mold and kind of direct, right? And, to establish some sort of system. And, I think about murals, right? Like everybody I know, and maybe I'm just not in the loop, but, like Scotch, Scotch is around my age. I'm a 40-year-old dude. Everybody I see kind of doing things mural wise is older, like my age. I remember when I was younger, when I was 19, 20, like, and I'd love to get out of wall. I would, kill to have the opportunities that I have now. You know what I mean? Sometimes people will come to me and like, hey, I got this massive wall. I can only pay you, this much. And I'm like, absolutely not. 19-year-old Rudy would have been like, I can have that done tomorrow, for a sandwich. And I think kind of like what's happening is like, and I don't know specific, I have theories in place, but like, I think what's happening is like all these systems are falling into place, right? And I think like censorship, kind of like misdirection, othering are all part of what's causing these little systems, right? Because now, to me, from the outside looking in, it's like I'm kind of worried about muralism because it's kind of been figured out, right? Like the system, the little lanes have been drawn, right? And all these old people like myself are kind of taking up these lanes. And so I'm looking at somebody else, hey, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. And I'm worried because I talked to a group of 20-year-olds last week. They're architectural students and they're just kinda like, yeah, murals, that's what that generation did. And I was like, "Oh, shit. Is this like a generational, like, wave?" You know? Because I remember when we were younger, it was, like, kinda cool. Everybody had a tag name, whether they tagged or didn't. And I think censorship has a place in that, you know what I mean? Because now there's like what do you say, there's a climate. There's certain things you can't paint, there's certain things you can't do. I mean, we'll talk about San Antonio. A lot of this comes up every time, you know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm painting a mural in San Antonio. Are you guys wanting a Spurs mural, a puro San Antonio mural, or are you guys wanting art? You know what I mean? And a lot of times, a lot of muralists, everybody's had to do it to some degree, whether they want to admit it or not. I've painted bars, I put the Spurs logo up, but it's like we really want just something that's really puro, that's really San Antonio. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, you want peach, teal, and marigold. And to me, I think that's like a form of censorship because it's like, hey, that part's not even available. Like, this is what we want. So I think, yeah, like, I know that's kind of maybe like an abstract way of view censorship, but I mean, to me, censorship is like parameters, and I think that example, that whole long-winded example about muralism is like an example of how the parameters kind of constricted it and made it to like this thing in the minds of young people. Or it's like, where are all these 21-year-old kids like crushing it right now? Like the opportunity's out there. I know now that the money's out there, that the walls are out there. It's like, how come they're not even, and like I said, like it doesn't seem from what I've seen like they're hungry for it. There's not just an interest for it now because it's this generation's thing. So I was like, oh man, who made that? You know, who made that situation? And I think like, yeah, censorship was involved.
I think in a way you're kind of answering my next question in which is has to do with how artists look and establish values that they follow in terms of their art practice. And everybody from the outside of the art community probably think that we who are artists have some idea of what is good art and what is bad art. And I think, if I'm reading into what you're saying, even if it comes to murals, like how they're being propagated so much, in some ways with pop culture and commercialism, I think you can have a really well done, technically well done mural. And I would say that there's a certain way you could describe that as being bad art because it doesn't help create that hunger. It's like an
Yeah, I
advertisement.
can
It's
see
like an
that.
advertisement. It's like when you give somebody everything they want, it's like sitting there feeling grossed out after eating a dozen donuts at one sitting. It's like,
Yeah.
you feel sick and you don't want to eat another donut for a long time. There's no hunger. The other side is, you have one bite of something really great that you maybe even never tasted before. And that makes that to me is like good art. It's like, there's
Yeah,
something, there's magic there. There's something, that wasn't expected. And that there can be some danger sometimes in the overpopularity of art because
I agree.
it kind of it diminishes the drive of artists, and it also diminishes, I think, for young artists or people coming up to feel like this is already covered. I don't want to do that stuff. It's
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
would you agree with that?
No, absolutely. I definitely I agree with that, man. It's like you go out and if you see, especially with muralisms, like, it's when you go outside and you paint a mural, it's, you're speaking loudly. You're in everybody's peripheral. They have to acknowledge that whether they're having a good day or bad day, they have time for it or not, right? So it's like, you fill up that space with something that's kind of wasn't worth or wasn't maybe not even worth is the right word, but it's just like not that energy too much of a creator was put into it, like, it wasn't meant to do anything but get some sort of shallow response of your eyes, you know what I mean? "Viva San Antonio," or something like that, like, to me, someone who lives here I live in San Antonio, I know all this, like, it's an echo. Yeah, I heard it over there, I heard it over here, I heard it over here, you know what I mean? Now it just at that point, it almost becomes, like advertising sometimes becomes just visual noise, you know what I mean? At some point, it's just it doesn't entice anything in me. You know what I mean? Now it's
Well,
just like,
yeah,
hey, the pattern of this place is that sometimes there's like, this type of image on there, just like when you run on the highway, like how many of us really pay attention to those billboards? Like, but we know they're there. We don't know what's on them. We don't look. We don't care.
yeah, in my head, I was imagining as you're saying that, like this idea of echo or sonar, like certain things are guided by sonar. And when you've got everything bouncing off and it creates this kind of cacophony of sound and noise, you can't get your bearings. It becomes overwhelming to your senses, and it kind of starts to defeat the purpose of trying to show you the way and how to navigate your life or how to navigate towards understanding. And it kind of comes to this next question, just to kind of keep things moving. Cultural sincerity was this term that I started to meditate on. And for me, the idea is there is this thing of cultural authenticity. There's something about cultural preservation, cultural appropriation. All of those things I think have their purpose in different times. And what I'm seeing right now to some extent is we as artists in the community, but also the community as a whole, you would expect them to go to the artist class to try to figure out, reconnect with sincerity and try to create a sense of what is cultural sincerity. If we've never asked that question, maybe now it's more important than ever. Does that resonate with you, this term cultural sincerity?
Yeah, I had never heard the term before, but I mean, just using the context of the word, I think it's just like, just to me, I boiled it down to just kind of like maybe just being genuine to whatever is going on. Am I correct? Or am I in the,
Yeah, the
is it
term isn't
related?
really out
Yeah.
there. The term is something I've
Okay.
actually
Okay.
thought like kind of came to me, and I thought, why not? I don't want to write down everything that it means. Why not just as part of this project,
Yeah, okay,
bring
okay.
bring the turn up and see what people have to say about what it might mean to them and
Yeah.
work our way through it.
No, I think yeah, I think kind of to me that's always been something important, right? Like it's always I think about my murals and if we get real didactic about it, I can break down some real things. This patterning, I just spoke at my mural over there by Houston and Cameron, right? And it's right by San Pedro Creek. And there's things in there, you know what I mean? That, for instance, I have a pottery pattern that has to do with like death, you know what I mean? Goes back to the Tiwa nation, you know what I mean? Like I think you could look at it and you could tell it's something, maybe if you don't know it right away. And I think, maybe not just, I know it's a little kind of maybe out there, but I think when you really put intentions into something, when you really give it your effort, I think that energy kind of, prehistoric, it just kind of hits us in our head, like, I feel like you could feel it, like our psyche is the oldest conversation that's been happening between humans, right? So we kind of like that information goes quick. Boom, you can feel something, we call it intuition. And I think something happens like that with art, where you could see something and you just get something that's quicker than words, right? And I think in order for that to happen, you need to come from a genuine place first because, your mind, and again, this is a science I'm making up, but in your mind, you'll distinguish like, oh, that's not valuable, trash it, right? And so I think, even if we can't articulate it or put it into words, it happens to us where we could say like, hey, that's kind of, I don't know why, but I'm kind of gravitating towards that. And I think it stems from being genuine, right? Like, and that's our own little, all of us have our unique little flavor of what genuine is to us. And if you could kind of portray that, to some degree, don't be, I don't think it's smart to be an open book and just leave everything out there for them to pick at like vultures, you know what I mean? But I mean, like, I think people can pick up the scent when you put a little bit on there. And I think that's what's needed, that whole exchange is what's needed to be, create great art, It needs to connect in that way. To me, that's what art does. It's a language, it speaks to something, it connects, it says something, you hear it, you exchange, a signifier, signified, So, I think it's a pivotal part, that cultural sincerity is a pivotal part of good art.
Yeah, and there's a difference between artistic sincerity and cultural sincerity in my mind because it's important for an individual artist to rise to the best of what they can do to have that artistic sincerity. But when you talk about cultural, you're talking about kind of like family. You're talking about the family of artists, the
Mm,
lineage of artists. You want for us to create a better future for not only self-service for our careers and lives, but to move forward in a way that will lead a younger generation and a future generation to see that the culture I grew up in respected and cultivated the type of sincerity that made this art community as good as it could possibly be.
yeah.
And
Okay.
that's kind of where I was going with it. And it kind of, again, leads into this thing of the last question in terms of it's got two parts, but one part of it is this acknowledgement of local art history and the importance of trying to improve one's own and also our community's knowledge and understanding of the history of art within our own region. And to do that, not only to honor and to learn from artists who have paved the way to get us to where we are today, but to do that almost as a practice that will yield the best results for up and coming artists or just new artists that
Yeah.
are coming into our community may have they need to know they're in a place that's going to promote and amplify the voices of artists and to give them to help support their careers and to help so this idea of advocacy, which is kind of at the heart of what my passion is about. You're a living working artist. Do you feel like you have a sense of local art history, or is it something that an area that is something you could tap into?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. When I was, before I started this life as an artist, I was I was a river rat. The only skill that I really had was that I could show up for a line cook job. So I was very much in the back of house industry and still doing my thing. Once I moved back from San Antonio, or once I moved back to San Antonio from Houston, even there I was a coffee roaster. My last job before this was I was chef boulanger. I was the head of all the bread and laminated dough at Bakery Lorraine. I was when that when Bakery Lorraine now is in Austin and has like 8 different locations now, but at one point it was a 2 bedroom on Grayson. And I was there. And I started picking up these little art gigs. I still had an interest in it. I was a new father, and so I was kind of like, again, I wasn't really aware of the art scene or just too involved, other than the slight education I got from Scotch, or like just by being around him and his peers. So I kind of looked into like, man, how does this happen for somebody, right? And of course, I'm a frugal guy and I like to read, so the Central Library was one of my favorite places to be. And anyone from San Antonio who knows goes to Central Library. Jesse Trevino is, prominently showed there. I looked into his story. I found that a lot of his stuff, or a lot of his foothold in San Antonio was he was, in a sense, worked very closely with the family Cortez from downtown, that restaurant group. And so that kind of got the idea is like, hey, I know 2 or 3 restaurant groups. I left on good terms with this guy. I left on this good, hey, do you need a flyer? You know what I mean? Or would you ever need something painted on the wall? Here, look, here's what I do. And so that was, just knowing that history of him was very much directly influenced me to ask the restaurant group around me if I could do something similar for them. Oh, and then again, you learn about the history of Los Quemados, Gonzafos, all that group. And again, it goes back to what we were talking about history. It's like, sometimes you feel like you're trying to get a foothold over here and you're like, oh, dang, people have done this. There's some sort of infrastructure in the sense that like I could go over here and see this work, or I could talk to this person, right? And so it kind of gives you like a little bearing or just a little marker on the map of where you can start. I think it's important in the sense that, if you're studious, industrious, that history could turn into something that you could wield for yourself and, get you some sort of leg up or just some sort of placement in this, and, at least vaguely give a dream of a way, you know what I mean, or something like that. So I think it's important for us to know, and also that, it's just kind of San Antonio's has a lot of amazing artists in it. So if you can just reach out and see what people are doing in the history of that sense. One of the things I was talking to somebody about this about, I think San Antonio, I think a lot of us are willing to communicate with each other or talk to new people. I haven't run into a lot of gatekeeping. I mean, I'm not going to say I haven't, but I haven't run into a lot of gatekeeping. And I think that's because a lot of us, at least the ones that I could think of, one shape or another, there's no, I don't know what the right term would be, but like maybe like a artistic, what, nepotism or something like that. Like, I don't really know if there's, and I mean there are, but to a degree where like, hey, this certain person said you're good and you're plugged in, or hey, this certain gallery is so prestigious. Once you get in there, you're good, you're set. You know what I mean? I think Presto's getting like, doing something great and they're close to that. But I only say all that to say that a lot of us that are whatever point we're at, like we were still very close to getting it from the ground up. So, we haven't, most of us haven't lost the sense of what it's like. So, I think just study in the sense at least what's going on around you. Because if you don't know what to do, somebody's probably done it to some degree. Reach out to them. There's probably some example. If there's not an example of it happening right now, there is probably a couple years back. So I mean,
Yeah.
that was long winded, but I think it is important.
No, it is. I'm trying with this kind. This is like a contemporary art history project in a way, like bringing everybody together and developing deeper sense of who they are, how they see the world. But also, what's missing to some extent is, we're all spread out, and as much as we're connected by this and by the devices and stuff, we're also disconnected in a way that the past wasn't. In the past, everybody got a newspaper in the morning and in the evening, and then they got a huge Sunday newspaper, and then there was like 3 or 4 channels, and one of those was public broadcasting. And so
Yeah.
the public broadcasting would be created by your local community. And there'd also be shows and the like that would happen on your local channels that were truly created by local individuals. They weren't being farmed out by like the Sinclair Group or something that
Yeah.
actually owns all of the media companies in like
Yeah.
all of Texas doing the same news. But it's hard because as I do the research, there's a very active, informed San Antonio in years past that read the paper, read about the lecture at the museum or the writers talk, and you had this ability to get informed, and that was a way to stay in touch, stay keep intact. And there was really, like Trinity Art Department, Trinity University, there were some really outstanding art teachers there for many years. And I'm hoping that as I continue this project, I find ways to be able to recreate a unified sense of where we started and where we are. And so that we could, there's some things that we may have lost along the way, but we could probably bring some of those back in some ways. If nothing else, make sure that this living art community starts to bring that knowledge back into their lives so that they can, in addition to mentoring and helping spread the news like you do when you give artist talks, everybody it's like goes back for that hunger thing where they feel
Yeah.
like, oh, they find something that, oh, I didn't know this is interesting. I'm take a deeper dive with this artist who taught at the Whitty Museum when the San Antonio Art Institute used to meet there in the 20th
Yeah.
century and things like that. And I want to close, I guess, the last part of this question because I like it. Tell me one thing that you really admire about the local art scene, and then tell me something that you kind of dislike about the art scene.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be the ultimate best answer in the world.
Right.
This is just off the top of your head.
Off the top of my head, well, the art scene that I'm familiar with, the only one that I really like what's happening at No Mas Arte Studios, and that's at 110 La Chapelle, and they've lumped themselves in with the second Saturday. That happens over there, and it's kind of still, you know, uh, the guy who runs is a good friend of mine, Marcos, and he's an artist, right? Who got this space and decided I'm gonna try something, right? And so, with that comes with a different type of energy, you know what I mean? As to other places that kind of got it figured out. There's still a sense of wildness to it, And people I don't know if a lot of people remember, but I mean, my first introduction to like any type of art scene was like the silos at Blue Star. Sometimes things would get messy over there, you know what I mean? Like it was kind of cool because it seemed like, or at least a narrative you could tell yourself in the head was like, oh, Blue Star's over here, and here are all the academics and the pinkies in the air, and like, over here the silos are punk rock and 32-ounce beers and stuff like that. And so I feel like what's happening at No Mas Artes Studios, at least, is it bounces in between that. I think that's kind of cool because I haven't seen that, and what I mean. I'm an older dude, and that appeases my nostalgic remembering of what fun was in the art scene. So I really like that. I really like what they're doing. Yeah, I don't really know much else that's going on. I'm a little too self-centered to know. And the only reason I know much about No Mas Arte Studios because he is my friend and his studio is like a block away from mine. But as far as maybe not liking, I think you kind of hit on it. I think you kind of hit on it where
Come
it's
on,
like we are all kind
independent.
of like disconnected. And I see, man, I was watching I think one of your previous podcast, the gentleman hit on this too, where it's kind of like we're so kind of disconnected. I feel this is the analogy of a San Antonio artist. You're kind of looking at stuff and you're working, and somebody asks you like, hey, let's do this, and you're like, what, when, okay, yeah, and then you know what, you end up going to the art shows and it's all like the same people. Like we're all just sloshing in it together, and then somebody will take a little bit out and add something in. So I wish we were kind of more informed with each other. Or like, I do think we are kind of disconnected, even though we're all tethered by, the phone. I'm putting my Kindle up right here, but we're not grouped. We're not moving in mass towards a direction for us, I don't think. You know what I mean? I think like there's a couple of paired like minds. I don't know. We need to like, I don't know what it is, march somewhere, demand we need a unionized union or something. I don't know what it is. Something like that.
We need to figure out how to unite in a way
I
that
agree.
is in service to ourselves and not necessarily like I'm hoping I'll invite a lot of other individuals like art administrators, leaders. A lot of them And I want to have them come on and talk about themselves, not their job. I mean, this is not about promoting your art organization or your art program or your agenda. It's really about trying to speak to your own experience because, if when we make a deeper connection about what we're experiencing, where we came from, and what's important to us, what are our values, without necessarily trying to connect that to monetization or without necessarily trying to feel like this is how people in power will pat us on the back and tell us we're doing a good job. We need to at some point make sure, like I was real concerned. I even talked to you once about one of your jobs that artists are getting the right pay. One of the things I had to do when I was working at PASA was go out and try to compare salaries from that were happening in different public art programs in Houston and Fort Worth or maybe Phoenix and make a comparative study so that I could make the case here in San Antonio that this is what you need in order to attract and keep a good cultural workforce. That is
I agree.
something that is completely needed here. It's like I almost feel like yeah, what would happen if we had an artist strike and everybody says, okay, no more, don't cross the line, no more
No
jobs.
more
We're
medals.
not going to do your
No
Fiesta
Fiesta
poster.
medals
We're
this
not going
year.
to do, we're all going to get together and do, a barbecue fundraiser to help raise money for us to survive for a little bit.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you got to pay us a certain wage. Anjali, who was one of my other episodes, and one of the things that she always fought for was making sure that writers were paid the proper wage that would be demanded in in professional circles. And it's really not happening, and it creates friction. But sometimes friction is what's needed to change the course of the trajectory of things. It's all connected, and hopefully, I got plans for this. It's taken me a while to get together. Trying to be brave about doing it the right way and do it independently, so that everybody understands there's a circle of trust here. You're free to say and do, be yourself. And I just really appreciate that you were willing to take the time and join me today, because it's something that immediately kind of jumped in my mind when I was putting this together, that I wanted to get you involved early. And I felt like getting to know you, there was a certain kind of instant connection once we kind of dropped our armor and we kind of
I agree.
allowed ourselves to kind of just be ourselves together.
Yeah.
And
Thank you for thinking of me, Jimmy. This was
I
fun.
hope we'll do something again real soon.
Yeah.
You know where to find me. I mean, the other thing I say is the last, you were talking about, I don't want to do graffiti and get charged for vandalism. I have to do all this community service. Well, look at you now. I mean, you're doing community service like nobody ever would have expected. Those guys back then, they said like, I don't want to do community service. And then they're like, jump
What's
forward
funny
in
that's
time
related
and
to
look
that
at
is
you
whenever I'm
today,
pressed to
all the
talk about it
community
in
work
certain
you do.
circles, I've even gone as far as to call it unpermissioned public art. And then if I start talking it quick enough after that, it'll just confuse them enough for them to forget, and I can talk about something else.
Yeah. I mean, well, I'm happy to talk to you again, and that's the plan. This format that I've come up with is just kind of this is
Okay.
the Art Field Agency 101. This is kind of setting the groundwork, and we're going to do some other things. We'll be in touch soon, and I appreciate you. I think what you should also know is that
Thank you for the
the
kind words.
community of San
I'm glad
Antonio
you asked me to do
appreciates
this.
you.
It was fun. See ya.
All right, we'll talk later.